My mother-in-law destroyed my wedding dress days before the ceremony, so I played the footage at our reception and shattered her perfect image instantly. I used to think that wedding days were supposed to be magical, untouchable moments where nothing could go wrong, until I discovered who had been sabotaging mine from the very beginning. My name is Isabella Green, I'm 28 years old, and I design wedding dresses for a living. Ironic, isn't it? I spent my career creating perfect moments for other brides, only to have my own dream wedding nearly destroyed by the one person who was supposed to welcome me into the family. The trouble started the moment I got engaged to David Whitmore 6 months ago, though looking back now, I realize the signs were there even before he slipped that diamond ring onto my finger. His mother, Lorraine, a 56-year-old retired elementary school teacher with perfectly coiffed silver hair and an arsenal of passive-aggressive weapons disguised as motherly concern, made it crystal clear from our very first meeting that I wasn't her first choice for her precious son. Hell, I probably wasn't even her 10th choice. Lorraine had this masterful way of delivering backhanded compliments that left me standing there like an idiot, trying to decode whether I'd just been insulted or praised. "Oh, that dress is so unique, dear," she'd say with a smile that never quite reached her pale blue eyes, the kind of smile that looked practiced in a mirror. "I'm sure it's very fashionable in certain circles." The emphasis she placed on certain circles made it sound like she was talking about some underground cult rather than mainstream fashion trends. At first I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she really was just old-fashioned, like David insisted. Maybe her comments about my unconventional career choice, designing wedding dresses for modern brides with modern tastes, weren't meant to sound as dismissive as they came across. Maybe when she told David's cousins at the engagement party that she never imagined he'd choose someone so artistic, she meant it as a compliment. But then there were the other comments, the ones that cut deeper and lingered longer. How she'd mentioned David's ex-girlfriend Sarah, such a sweet girl, came from a lovely family, worked in healthcare, very stable, whenever we discussed our future plans. How she'd sigh wistfully whenever someone brought up grandchildren, saying things like, "Well, I suppose some women prioritize career over family these days." How she'd accidentally bring up every single one of David's past relationships whenever I was around, complete with detailed comparisons of their various virtues. David always brushed off my concerns about his mother with the kind of oblivious optimism that only comes from being someone's golden child for 30 years. "She's just old-fashioned," he'd say, kissing my forehead with that gentle smile that made me fall in love with him in the first place. "She'll come around once she sees how happy you make me. Mom just needs time to adjust. She's protective because she loves me." I wanted to believe him. God, how desperately I wanted to believe that Lorraine's behavior was just a case of overprotective mother syndrome that would eventually resolve itself once she realized I wasn't going anywhere. But I noticed things David didn't. Or maybe things David had been trained not to see after 3 decades of living with a woman who wielded guilt and manipulation like precision instruments. I noticed how she'd rearrange our wedding planning timeline during what she called helpful mother-son conversations, convincing David that we were moving too fast or that certain vendors needed more time to prepare. I noticed how vendor appointments would mysteriously get cancelled, always with some perfectly reasonable explanation that somehow never quite added up when I tried to verify the details. My carefully chosen florist suddenly had a family emergency the week we were supposed to finalize arrangements. The photographer I'd been courting for months claimed there was a miscommunication about our date and had already booked someone else. The caterer I'd fallen in love with after tasting their incredible lemon cake mysteriously raised their prices by 40% overnight, pricing us out of their services. Each time something went wrong, Lorraine would appear with an alternative suggestion, always someone she knew personally, someone who could give us a family discount, someone who would understand our vision better than my original choice. Her suggestions weren't necessarily bad, but they weren't mine, and slowly but surely our wedding was becoming less about what David and I wanted, and more about what Lorraine could orchestrate from behind the scenes. The wedding planning process became a constant battle of wills disguised as family collaboration. Lorraine would suggest alternatives to everything I chose, always with that same saccharine smile, and a tone that made her sound like she was doing me the most incredible favor. She wanted a church wedding, something traditional and meaningful, dear, while I preferred an outdoor ceremony surrounded by the natural beauty that had always made me feel most at peace. She pushed relentlessly for traditional white roses, classic never goes out of style, when I had my heart absolutely set on garden peonies with their soft romantic layers and subtle fragrance that reminded me of my grandmother's garden. She insisted on inviting her entire book club. They've known David since he was a baby, they're practically family. When I wanted to keep the guest list intimate, filled only with people who truly knew and loved us as a couple, she had opinions about my dress style, my choice of bridesmaids, the music selection, even the font on our invitations. Every conversation felt like a negotiation where I was somehow always the one making concessions. Each compromise felt like a small defeat, like I was slowly losing pieces of myself in the name of family harmony, but I told myself it was worth it to keep the peace. Worth it to avoid the tension that would inevitably arise if I put my foot down and refused to accommodate her suggestions. David was caught in the middle, and I could see how much it stressed him when his mother and I disagreed. So I smiled and nodded and agreed to changes that made my stomach twist with disappointment, telling myself that the important thing was marrying David, not having the perfect wedding. But as the months wore on, I started to feel like I was planning someone else's wedding. Someone who shared Lorraine's taste for traditional elegance and formal presentations. Someone who valued appearances over personal meaning. Someone who wasn't me at all. When I looked at our growing list of vendors and arrangements, I barely recognized my own vision anymore. 3 weeks before the wedding, when the stress should have been reaching its peak but everything should have been falling into place, strange things started happening that went beyond mere difference of opinion or wedding planning politics. My wedding planning binder, a thick, meticulously organized collection of contracts, inspiration photos, vendor information, and handwritten notes, disappeared from David's house, only to reappear 3 days later with several pages mysteriously torn out. The missing pages included my original vendor contact list, and some personal notes I'd written about my vision for the ceremony. The sample fabrics I'd been comparing for table linens vanished from my studio apartment. I'd spread them out on my work table to see how they looked in different lighting, planning to make my final decision that weekend. When I came back from lunch, they were gone. Not misplaced, not fallen behind furniture, just gone. When I called the rental company to request new samples, they claimed they'd never sent me samples in the first place, despite the email confirmation sitting right there in my inbox. My grandmother's pearl necklace, which I planned to wear as my something old, a family heirloom that connected me to generations of women who had worn it on their own wedding days, went missing from my jewelry box. I tore my apartment apart looking for it, checking every drawer, every pocket, every possible hiding place. The necklace held such sentimental value that losing it felt like losing a piece of my family history. Each incident seemed minor enough to be an accident, easy enough to explain away as wedding stress or simple misfortune. But together they formed a pattern that made my skin crawl and kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I was losing my mind or if someone was deliberately trying to sabotage my wedding preparations. The rational part of my brain kept insisting that I was being paranoid, that planning a wedding was stressful enough to make anyone feel like the universe was conspiring against them. But the intuitive part of my brain, the part that had been picking up on Lorraine's subtle hostility for months, whispered that this wasn't coincidence or bad luck. This felt personal. This felt intentional. That's when I decided to install a small security camera in my studio apartment. I told myself it was just for peace of mind, a way to catch whoever might be breaking in and taking my things. I never imagined I'd capture something far more sinister than a common burglar looking for valuables to pawn. The camera was motion activated and sent alerts to my phone whenever it detected movement in the room. I positioned it carefully to capture the main area of my studio where I kept my wedding materials, my dress in progress, and my most valuable equipment. For the first week after installation, it only caught me coming and going, the occasional delivery person dropping off supplies, and my cat Whiskers knocking things off my desk in his eternal quest to prove that gravity still worked. I started to feel foolish for being so paranoid, wondering if wedding stress had finally pushed me over the edge into genuine paranoia. Maybe I really was just misplacing things due to the overwhelming pressure of trying to plan the perfect wedding while managing a demanding career and navigating the increasingly complex dynamics with my future mother-in-law. Maybe the disappearing items and canceled appointments were just a string of unfortunate coincidences, and I was reading malicious intent into perfectly innocent mishaps. For 7 days, the camera showed me nothing more threatening than my own daily routine and my cat's ongoing war against organized workspaces. I began to think about taking it down. embarrassed by my own suspicions and ready to chalk up my recent troubles to nothing more than pre-wedding jitters and bad luck. Then came the morning that changed everything. The morning when my worst fears were confirmed in a way that was somehow both shocking and sickeningly inevitable. I woke up on the Thursday before my Saturday wedding, with my heart pounding from excitement and nerves. Today was the day I'd planned to do my final dress fitting, make last-minute alterations, and steam away any wrinkles. I'd been working on this dress for months, a custom creation that combined vintage lace from my grandmother's wedding gown with a modern silhouette that made me feel like a princess. I walked into my studio with my morning coffee, humming the song David and I had chosen for our first dance. The morning sunlight was streaming through my tall windows, creating the perfect atmosphere for what should have been one of the happiest moments of my pre-wedding preparations. But when I pulled back the protective covering from my dress, my coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered on the hardwood floor. My beautiful wedding dress hung in tatters. The delicate lace sleeves had been cut clean off. The bodice was slashed in 3 places, revealing the internal structure underneath. But the worst part was the dark red liquid that had been poured across the entire skirt. It looked like blood, but when I leaned closer, I could smell the sharp chemical scent of fabric dye. My knees gave out, and I sank to the floor among the shards of my broken mug, staring up at the destroyed remnant of my dream dress. 6 months of planning, 3 months of careful construction, countless hours of hand-sewn beadwork, all ruined. The wedding was in 2 days. There was no time to create another dress, no time to find a replacement that would fit properly. I called David immediately, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what had happened. He rushed over within minutes, and when he saw the dress, his face went white with shock. "Who would do this?" he kept asking, pacing around my studio like a caged animal. "Who could hate us enough to destroy your wedding dress?" I wanted to voice my suspicions about his mother, but I had no proof. The building's main entrance required a key card, but David had given copies to several family members so they could help with wedding preparations. Anyone could have gotten in. That's when I remembered the security camera. My hands were trembling as I pulled up the app on my phone and scrolled back through the previous night's footage. David stood behind me, his breath warm on my neck as we watched the timestamps roll backward. 11:47 p.m., 10:23 p.m., 9:15 p.m. Nothing unusual, just the empty studio lit by streetlights from outside. Then we reached 2:14 a.m., and everything changed. The camera had captured a figure entering my studio using a key card. At first, the person was just a shadow moving carefully through the darkness. But when they turned on a small flashlight to navigate around my work tables, the beam illuminated their face for just a moment. It was Lorraine. David gasped and grabbed my phone, replaying the timestamp over and over as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. In the video, his mother moved with purpose, heading straight for my dress display. She pulled out a pair of scissors from her purse, my missing fabric scissors, I realized, and began systematically cutting through the delicate lace. The most chilling part wasn't the destruction itself, but the expression on her face. She wasn't crying or showing any signs of remorse. Instead, she looked almost pleased. When she pulled out a bottle of red fabric dye and began pouring it across the white silk, she was actually smiling. The video showed her taking photos of the destroyed dress with her phone, before carefully cleaning up any evidence she might have left behind. She even wiped down the scissors before placing them on my work table, making it look like the destruction had happened during the day when anyone could have been responsible. "I don't understand," David whispered, replaying the video for the 5th time. "Why would she do this? Why would my mother want to ruin our wedding?" I had theories, but this wasn't the time to psychoanalyze his mother's motivations. We had a wedding in 48 hours and no dress. While David sat in stunned silence, I forced myself into action mode. I called every bridal shop within a 50-mile radius, explaining my emergency and begging for help. Most places laughed when I said I needed a dress in 2 days, but finally, a small boutique in the next town over said they had one sample dress that might work. It wasn't exactly my style, more traditional than I'd wanted, with puffy sleeves that reminded me of the 1980s, but it was white, it was my size, and it was available. David offered to confront his mother immediately, but I stopped him. An idea was forming in my mind, one that felt both terrifying and perfectly justified. "Don't say anything to her yet," I told him. "Let me think about this." "Think about what?" "Isabella. She destroyed your wedding dress. She sabotaged our wedding." We need to be smart about this, I interrupted. If we confront her now, she'll just deny everything. She'll say the video is fake or make up some excuse. But if we wait for what? I looked at the video on my phone, watching his mother's satisfied smile as she poured dye across months of my hard work. If we wait, we can make sure everyone knows exactly who she really is. That evening, I drove to the boutique and picked up the replacement dress. It wasn't what I'd dreamed of, but it would do. More importantly, I stopped by an electronics store and purchased a portable projector and a laptop. If Lorraine wanted to play games, I was ready to change the rules. Friday passed in a blur of last-minute preparations. Lorraine called twice to check on wedding details, her voice dripping with fake concern. I heard there was some trouble with your dress, dear, she said during the second call. Such a shame. These things happen, I suppose. I hope you managed to find a replacement. The audacity of her sympathy made my skin crawl, but I kept my voice steady. Yes, thank you for asking. Everything worked out fine. Oh good, I was so worried. You know how important it is for a bride to feel beautiful on her special day. I wanted to reach through the phone and shake her, but instead I just said, Don't worry, Lorraine, I'm going to make sure everyone remembers this wedding. Saturday morning dawned clear and beautiful, exactly the kind of weather I'd hoped for. The outdoor venue looked like something from a fairy tale, with white chairs arranged in perfect rows facing an arch covered in the garden peonies I'd insisted on. The catering staff was setting up tables for the reception, and the photographer was already capturing detail shots of the decorations. I got ready with my bridesmaids in a small cottage on the venue grounds, trying to channel excitement instead of the nervous energy that had been building for 2 days. The replacement dress actually looked better than I'd expected once it was properly fitted and steamed. My hair and makeup were perfect. Everything was falling into place. But the best part was the small bag I'd hidden behind the cottage, containing my laptop and the portable projector. The ceremony went off without a hitch. David looked incredibly handsome in his navy suit, and when he saw me walking down the aisle, his eyes filled with tears of joy. For a moment, I almost forgot about the events of the past few days. This was what mattered. The love between us, the commitment we were making, the life we were building together. Even Lorraine behaved herself during the ceremony, though I caught her dabbing at her eyes with a tissue in what I'm sure she thought was a touching display of maternal emotion. She had no idea what was coming. The reception began with cocktail hour while the photographer took family portraits. Lorraine made a point of posing with David and me, her arm around my waist as she smiled for the camera. You look lovely, dear, she whispered to me as the photographer adjusted his settings. Though I do miss that original dress you showed me pictures of. Such a shame about what happened. Don't worry, I whispered back, matching her smile. Everyone's going to see exactly what happened to that dress. Dinner was served as the sun began to set, creating a golden glow over the reception area. The food was delicious, the wine was flowing, and our guests were in high spirits. Several people had already given impromptu toasts, sharing funny stories about David and me and wishing us well in our marriage. As dessert was being served, David's best man stood up to give the official best man speech. He told embarrassing stories about David's college years and made everyone laugh with his impression of David's reaction when he first saw me. The speech was sweet and funny, and when it ended, everyone raised their glasses in a toast. That's when I stood up. Thank you all so much for being here tonight, I began, my voice carrying clearly across the reception area. This has been the most incredible day, and David and I are so grateful to have all of you here to celebrate with us. I paused, looking around at the faces of our family and friends, all of them smiling and relaxed from good food and wine. Lorraine was beaming at me from the head table, probably thinking I was about to give some sentimental speech about how wonderful it was to gain a new mother. Before we continue with the evening, I wanted to share something special with all of you, I continued. As many of you know, I design wedding dresses for a living, and I spent months creating the perfect dress for today. Unfortunately, that dress was destroyed 2 nights ago in what I initially thought was a terrible accident. Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the crowd. Several people called out condolences, and I saw David's aunt reach over to pat Lorraine's hand in a gesture of shared maternal concern. But then I realized it wasn't an accident at all, I said, my voice getting stronger. Thanks to security footage from my studio, I was able to see exactly what happened to my dress and who was responsible. The murmurs died away as people began to sense that this wasn't going where they'd expected. David was looking at me with wide eyes, clearly not sure what I was planning to do. Lorraine's smile was starting to look strained around the edges. I reached into my small bag and pulled out the laptop and projector I'd hidden there earlier. I think it's important for everyone to see the truth about what happened, so I'm going to show you the security footage. Isabella, what are you doing? Lorraine called out, her voice sharp with panic. But it was too late. I'd already connected the projector to my laptop and aimed it at the large white screen that had been set up to display our slideshow of engagement photos. The crowd turned in their chairs to face the screen, curious about what they were about to see. The timestamp showed 2:14 a.m., and there was Lorraine, creeping through my dark studio with a flashlight and a pair of scissors. The reception area fell completely silent except for the sound of the video playing. Everyone watched in stunned shock as David's mother systematically destroyed my wedding dress, her face clearly visible in the beam of her flashlight. The video captured every cut, every splash of red dye, and most damning of all, the satisfied smile on her face as she surveyed her handiwork. When the video ended, the silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I looked around at the faces of our guests. Shock, disbelief, disgust, and in some cases recognition, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place for them. Lorraine was standing now, her face flushed red with humiliation and rage. "This is fake," she said, her voice shaking. "This video has been manipulated. Isabella is trying to frame me because she's never liked me." But her protests fell on deaf ears. The video was too clear, too detailed to be fake. Several guests who knew Lorraine well were staring at her in horror, clearly recognizing her face and mannerisms in the footage. David stood up slowly, his face a mask of hurt and betrayal. "Mom," he said quietly, "how could you do this? I was protecting you." Lorraine burst out, abandoning her denials. "She's not right for you, David. She's selfish and manipulative, and she's going to ruin your life. I was trying to save you from making the biggest mistake of your life. By destroying her wedding dress? By sabotaging our wedding?" David's voice was getting louder. "By lying to my face for the past 2 days while I watched my fiancée cry over her ruined dress?" "You don't understand," Lorraine pleaded, looking around at the hostile faces surrounding her. "I've watched her manipulate you, turn you against your own family. She doesn't deserve you." "No," David said firmly, "you don't understand. Isabella is my wife now, and what you did was unforgivable. I want you to leave, now. You can't be serious. I'm your mother. A mother who loved me wouldn't have done this. A mother who loved me would have wanted me to be happy, even if she didn't approve of my choice. You need to go." Lorraine looked around the reception area, searching for allies, but found none. Even her own relatives were looking at her with disgust and disappointment. Her sister-in-law, who had always been her closest friend in the family, was shaking her head in disbelief. "Fine," Lorraine said, grabbing her purse from the table. "But don't come crying to me when this marriage falls apart. Don't expect me to welcome you back when you realize what a mistake you've made." "The only mistake I made was not seeing who you really were sooner," David replied. Lorraine stormed out of the reception area, but not before turning back to shoot me a look of pure hatred. "You think you've won something here," she called out. "But you've just destroyed a family. I hope you're proud of yourself." I met her gaze steadily. "I didn't destroy anything. I just showed everyone what you really are." After she left, the reception area remained quiet for several minutes. Then David's father stood up and began to clap. "I want to apologize to Isabella and David for my wife's behavior," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "What she did was inexcusable, and I'm ashamed that it took video evidence for me to see how toxic she'd become." One by one, other guests began to applaud as well. Several people came up to hug me and David, expressing their shock at what they'd witnessed and their support for our marriage. David's aunt pulled me aside to tell me that she'd suspected Lorraine of sabotaging family events for years but had never had proof. "She did the same thing to my daughter's graduation party," she confided. "Mysterious problems with the catering. The photographer mysteriously cancelled. We always wondered if it was more than bad luck." As the evening progressed, the mood gradually shifted back to celebration. The band started playing again. People returned to dancing, and the joy that Lorraine had tried so hard to destroy began to reassert itself. But the best part was seeing David's relief as he realized he was finally free from his mother's manipulation. "I'm so sorry," he told me as we swayed together during our first dance. "I should have seen what she was doing. I should have protected you from her. You couldn't have known, I replied. She was very good at hiding her true nature. But now everyone knows exactly who she is. Are you sure you're okay with how this all played out? I know you didn't want drama at our wedding. I looked around at our guests, who were laughing and dancing and celebrating our love despite everything that had happened. I'm more than okay with it. She tried to destroy our wedding, but instead she just showed everyone that our love is strong enough to survive anything she could throw at us. The following weeks were challenging as David's family worked through the aftermath of Lorraine's actions. His father filed for divorce, saying he couldn't stay married to someone who would deliberately hurt their own child. Several family members cut contact with Lorraine entirely, while others demanded she seek therapy before they would consider speaking to her again. Lorraine tried to reach out to David multiple times, leaving voicemails and sending letters filled with apologies and excuses. But the damage was done. David had finally seen his mother's true nature, and there was no going back to the way things had been. For my part, I felt an incredible sense of relief. For months, I'd been questioning my own sanity, wondering if I was being paranoid about Lorraine's behavior. Having concrete proof of her sabotage validated everything I'd been feeling and freed me from the gaslighting that had been slowly eroding my confidence. David and I moved forward with our marriage stronger than ever. The shared trauma of dealing with his mother's betrayal had forced us to communicate more openly and support each other more deeply. We learned to trust our instincts about people and to protect our relationship from outside interference. 6 months later, we found out that Lorraine had been telling people around town that I had manipulated the security footage, and that David would eventually come to his senses and divorce me. But her version of events never gained traction, because too many people had witnessed her behavior firsthand at our wedding. As I write this story now, 2 years after our wedding, David and I are happier than ever. We bought a house together, adopted a dog, and are planning to start a family soon. We send holiday cards to David's father and the family members who supported us, but Lorraine's name is never mentioned. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't installed that security camera. If I'd never caught Lorraine in the act, would she have continued sabotaging our marriage in small, subtle ways? Would I have spent years questioning my own perceptions and wondering why nothing ever seemed to go right? But then I remember the look on her face in that video. The satisfaction she took in destroying something I'd worked so hard to create, and I know that exposing her was the right choice. Some people might say I was cruel for humiliating her in front of our entire family, but I believe that actions have consequences. She chose to destroy my wedding dress. I simply chose to let everyone see what she had done. The truth has a way of setting you free, even when it's painful. Lorraine thought she could control our lives through manipulation and sabotage. But in the end, her own actions became the spotlight that revealed exactly who she was. I didn't destroy her reputation. She did that herself the moment she decided to sneak into my studio with scissors and fabric dye. Now, when I help other brides plan their perfect weddings, I always remind them that the most important thing isn't the dress or the flowers or the decorations. It's surrounding yourself with people who genuinely want to see you happy, and who will celebrate your joy instead of trying to diminish it. Some people will try to steal your happiness because they can't create their own, but you have the power to protect what matters most to you. My wedding day didn't turn out exactly as I'd planned, but it ended up being perfect in its own way. Not because everything went smoothly, but because it showed me exactly who belonged in my life and who didn't. Sometimes the most beautiful thing about a wedding isn't what you gain, but what you're finally brave enough to let go of.